Ridley, and I have the privilege of being the chair of Unify Palm Beach County. The purpose of tonight is to talk about the people budget review process. As many of you already know, billions of dollars have entered into the state of Florida and placed in the hands of appointed and elected officials who oftentimes will prioritize the issues of concern for the powerful and the wealthy. Too often, the needs of working class families, Black and brown families, and essential workers are ignored. We're going to now enter into a conversation around the economic impact being led both by Dr. Maria Cole and Ms. Kristyn Cox. Ms. Kristyn, we're going to ask you to start the conversation. It is my understanding that you have a brief presentation to help outline what one community in Delray would experience. Ms. Cox?
Thanks, Chuck. Yes, so Kristyn Cox here, co-founder and partner with Thrive Collective. We are based out of Delray Beach. We are supporting marginalized communities in building wealth and power, supporting capacity building efforts in community-led redevelopment and community development initiatives. And yeah, I'll just share my screen here to go over some of what we're focused on here in Delray Beach, led by a coalition. So Thrive Collective is the administrative arm of a coalition of partners in the set in Delray Beach, which is approximately 1,000-acre community east of 95 to Swinton Avenue, which is our race line. And we've got about, how many blocks north? 14 blocks north and south. This here is our resolution by our city council back in 1935, which declared the set, which the community has rebranded it as the Negro Settlement. So this is a community where Black folks had to live, could build, could own businesses, but were forced to live. And the families in this community, made the most of that, built an amazing community of resiliency, of resistance, an insular community, interdependent community of associations, including our faith-based, our recreational sports leagues, and our social network of Black community, like our Nasarimas and our Masons, and all sorts of efforts, coalitions, associations, and things were built because they had to be, right? Because this is where folks had to live, had to grow, and did amazingly, education-wise, but also was at the brunt end of racist institutions and the practices of those, right? So then comes our redevelopment efforts. A lot of folks are familiar with, and Erwin, thank you for uplifting the budgets of our community redevelopment agencies here in Palm Beach County, Delray Beach having one of the largest budgets in a community redevelopment agency at almost, I think it was $50 million. And what our community has started to develop in this coalition of partners to implement its own plan for how community-led organizations can help develop the community in a way that it needs to. And that's focused on from housing, to our economic mobility efforts, and the resources that need to be made available to our small businesses and entrepreneurs and side hustlers, the assets of our landowners and homeowners, and the investments that need to be made to keep those thriving and available for community And so what I'd like to uplift, though, are some of the conditions because of the practices and policies of racist institutions and systems. We're talking redlining and divestment and desegregation and the financing institutions and what resources have not been made available to this community historically. So this is what we have as the results of that. This is the set makes up about 20% of the population of Delray Beach. It is mostly Black, and about 30% of the residents are foreign born, mostly of Haitian descent. It is also our fastest growing area, and what that really speaks to is the gentrification of the neighborhood. To be very, very clear about that. I mean, it is a community of families, so that also speaks to the growth, but it is also gentrifying rapidly. There's 19.2% growth in the set versus only 4.7% growth in the city. And these numbers are also from the census from 2015, from census surveying from 2015. So we know this will be updating here soon. Next month, we'll get some updated numbers and data on all of this. We also know that it's a working community, but that 76% of those working work outside of the city altogether, not just outside of their community, but outside of the city altogether. So they're having to travel for work. 92% of the jobs, though, that are in the community, that are in the set, are held by folks that are not residents of that community. So there are jobs, there's actually good paying jobs in the set, but the residents do not own them, do not hold them. And so a number, majority of the workforce in the set, I'm sorry, I'm confused about that last data point. Hold on. Oh, there we go. So some of our challenges are that many of the seniors lack resources to support themselves. So we have a lot of seniors in our community. It's been well established for a long time. So a number of the households and the home ownership in general is high, but it's by folks that are on fixed incomes. The jobs that folks do have are low wage jobs, and those are growing because Delray Beach is a destination focused on tourism and accommodating those that visit the city or that have second, third homes, so that come seasonally to the city. And so we are very focused in Delray Beach on an economy of service and hospitality, which are low paying jobs. The 16% hold a bachelor's degree in the set versus 34% in the city overall. We have a high poverty rate. 63% of our households are at or below 200% of the federal poverty line. We have a higher unemployment rate in the set compared to the city overall. 38% of our residents have no health insurance. And our median household incomes in the set are around $29,000. So let's say $30,000 versus $50,000 for the city overall, and 52 and a half about for the county. So our residents in the set are at much lower incomes. And what's really important to take note in that is that a lot of the programs that are developed by our institutions and systems will focus on this area median income to create, who can access them and who can and can't access these programs. And the problem with that is, for instance, in the county, they will base that off the area median income of folks in the county, right? So 52%, if you're at that, you can access a program possibly, right? But 29,000 you can't. And the prime example is the county's workforce housing program. County's workforce housing program, minimum household for a low income to access that program is 47,000 you need to be making. So if you're at 29,000, you can't access the county's workforce housing program. this is just some of the, some of the bright spots that we see. So when we look at the work of the coalition and community-led efforts and how we build power and wealth in our community, how we create a network of interdependence and cooperation and collaboration, there are bright spots. There is a young population in the set. We talked about there being a heavy senior population. Those are a lot of our established owner-occupied households, but we have an average age of around 34 versus 44 for the city of residents in the set. We spoke before about being very active in the workforce. There are a large number of micro businesses, and those businesses employing 20 employees or less. In the set. So we are very entrepreneurial, whether folks know it or not. And that's some of the work of the coalition in uplifting and celebrating and identifying these business owners and entrepreneurs. And you can find out more information on that through the Peach Umbrella Network, which you can find on the set, delray.org. That's the website for our community. And we've got, as I mentioned before, 60% of the jobs in the set paid more than the county's median wage. So we believe there's just a disconnect, right? There's work that we have to do in connecting our folks to the jobs that are actually available in the set. Our largest employers are the city, the school district. We've got Palm Beach County Courthouse, our South End Courthouse in Delray, Delray Medical Center. So there are some better paying jobs. Our folks just aren't accessing them. We also have a high number of self-employed workers, specifically in the construction trades. And we have a homeownership rate that is pretty on par with the city at 54.7%. Also, some of our assets that we like to uplift are that we are an intergenerational community of activists. It's a very tight-knit community where there's been a lot of built interdependence on these associations and networks and community-led organizations, and the culture and the history that comes with that. So we have a lot to celebrate and to uplift that we identify as our community-based assets. And we think that those are opportunities to build the infrastructure and capacity that we need to get things done for ourselves. The set transformation plan is, I believe I mentioned earlier, is a plan that the community through the Westland Redevelopment Coalition now evolved into this coalition of partners helping to implement this plan. This was developed while our community-based organization still had some leverage and relationship with our community redevelopment agency. So the set transformation plan in Delray Beach is these are really our guiding principles, building communities' capacity, increasing our civic stewardship, investing in community wealth building opportunities, whether that's in households, in training and education, in our our economy and our entrepreneurs, building a healthy community, and some placemaking efforts. So we also believe that it's important to create the space for these things to happen, and strategic investments. So Thrive Collective is one of those partners as making strategic investments in these efforts and initiatives. Thrive Collective is an LLC, but we are also a foundation. So we are also helping to resource a lot of these efforts that are community led. I mentioned the Westland Redevelopment Coalition before. This is an organization that goes back to 1996, really formed as a resistance to the institutional practices of redevelopment, what used to be called urban renewal. And Chuck Ridley here has taught us that the community hears urban renewal, and that means Black folk removal, right? So the community has always been on guard about these efforts. And so from very early on, put these organizations in place to hold these institutions, these agencies accountable to community. And we are now holding ourselves accountable, right? We're now creating what we know the institutions and systems won't do, because it's not why they were created. It's not how they're supposed to operate. And there is times when we can maybe come together and work together with those that are in charge, elected or appointed, or staffing these institutions and systems. And there's other times when we need to be able to just get to work. And this is really how our, what we call the coalition lays out, and how we hold ourselves accountable to community. Our North Star being the set transformation plan that we've discussed. So if you see here, we've got a number of partners that are around this table for implementation of the transformation plan and efforts of economic mobility, community development, housing, our civic engagement and stewardship, and health and education. So these projects that the partners work on come from the SET transformation plan, are vetted by community through the SET Neighborhood Alliance and approved. So projects do not get a green light until community approves them. And these partners then come together and implement and help build the capacity of community through that. So it's not doing for, it's doing with. These organizations that you see around this table are all community led in their board membership and their staff. And so it's really bringing the resources directly to these organizations to build out that infrastructure and the capacity to be able to sustain the work as well. And I think that was the last slide I had. Yep.
Kristyn, can you go back to the guiding principles?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it's important that we look at that, because that kind of translates to every community.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of is a framework that we can kind of use to talk about initiatives and talk about what we're centering on with respect to the budget, a people's budget, and what is necessary in our communities. We did talk about gentrification without displacement. We talked about community health. All of these things work together as a unit. And it's not like, I represent Paragon, and most of what we do is with small businesses, but we know that small businesses aren't successful without successful communities, right? And so that all of these things have to work together. And how do we look at communities as like an ecosystem in a more holistic way? And where our institutional, and when I say institutional, I mean our government budget investments come, that could actually be leveraged for the success of a community rather than extracting resources from a community, right? So that like some of the things that I think of that are like really simple, or when we do talk about, we talked about the challenges of the set. That's it's typical of most neighborhoods. Like, what about making place and making seniors whole in their households, right? Like, imagine if you took an investment, a community investment in making sure that seniors' homes are livable and that their roof is repaired, for example, and things like that. But imagine if you leverage that to also do job training in the building trades, so that people from the community or the small businesses from that community that are doing those building trades outside of their community, but can actually work in their community to help make their community more sustainable. That's an investment in the community that builds community, right? Those dollars stay in the community, those dollars cycle through the community, and it supports successful community in a way in which I think we need to start thinking about and bringing that attention to when we start talking about the budget, and then we start talking about community dollars, and we start talking, because it's very easy for our local municipal governments, our county government, even our state government to make deals with developers and give them tax credits and all of this other stuff, right? But what happens when, rather than extracting those resources from the community, we actually invest in the resources of the community and create and start feeding into these guiding principles as a notion of an ecosystem that really capitalizes on the resources of the community.
Yeah. I think that, we have a lot to say about how our city and CRA's budgets are expended, but there's an ideology of the investments made in people versus the investments made in properties and the infrastructure. So we see infrastructure as our assets of our community. Our people are our infrastructure. Those are where we need to make investments, right? That's where capacity has to be built to sustain, right? And made whole, right? There's a lot of equitable, reparable investments that need to be made in people, right? Because of the historic practices in these communities, these racist practices and policies of these communities. So starting from there, right? And there's this ideology in the systems and institutions of it, they're okay with making these investments in a business property, a commercial property, in a development effort, with no strings attached, really, right? On a best intention, on a what is it, Chuck? We talk about our best to give your best effort to hire locally, right? Yeah, that's all that the clawback that we have. But when it comes to making those investments in someone's home, in making a micro loan to an entrepreneur, we're not in the business of making folks rich. Well, I think that you actually have been in the business of making folks rich for a long time.
Just not us.
Right. They just don't look like us. Like those are the investments that they're not willing to make. And so we are all about organizing to have that fight, right? To call that out and draw attention to that. We can, I think a prime example to the point you made is in our seniors' homes, right? Folks on fixed incomes that cannot afford the repairs that their homes need. Our CRA could have a budget line item towards housing rehab that is focused on our seniors, and they don't, right? The investments that our CRA has are in the curb appeal, right? What the outside of the house looks like. The inside is falling apart, right? But they have a budget line item towards what the outside looks like. And these are just things that we collect stories from our community, about their attempts to access these resources and the burdens that they come with, right? The barriers that it comes with, requiring seniors to have homeowners insurance, folks that haven't had to have a mortgage, haven't had a mortgage in years, haven't had to have homeowners insurance. And we all know that homeowners insurance is great. It's awesome if you have it, but if you can't afford it, you can't afford it, right? Just the same as you can't afford the repairs on your home. So why require people to have homeowners insurance? That's a bill they can't pay. They can't pay for the house, but they want you to have homeowners insurance for their housing rehab program. And a lien, right? I don't see the business owners on East Atlantic Avenue that got the investments from whatever business grants from our CRA. They don't have liens against their property for the investments that those institutions gave them. They could be out of business already from those investments, and nobody's holding them accountable to have to, for those dollars that were spent. But for folks in our community, we have to have a lien for 10 to 15 years against the home for $40,000 that we needed for some home repairs. So, you know, we're just going to keep organizing, right? We'll continue to uplift the stories of these institutions and the practices and the budgets and how they don't work for us, while we continue to build the capacity for us to do for ourselves.
Plus, I wanted to add to that about, especially around the developers and development, how about them being good corporate and community stewards, right? What is the community benefit that they are participating in with respect to our communities, right? Even some of the communities where there is legitimately overdevelopment, right? What are they doing to address infrastructure? What are they doing to show that they are a good community partner for our communities, right? And that's something that we can bring attention to with respect to what our budgets, our people's budget means in real life, in real terms to our communities.
Absolutely. And I'd like to also add, in addition to the budgets, this ideology of competition with community is problematic, right? We've got these, you know, we've got elected officials and folks that want to pat themselves on the back and take, you know, groundbreaking pictures and all that. We know that's what politicians like to do, but doing it in competition with community-led, community-based organizations that are gonna be the sustaining, long-lasting, you know, partner in community, well past an official's term, well past the time that, you know, even some of these senior directors and so even in Delray Beach, our city managers stick around. Those are also important investments to make, right? We're not suggesting that government needs to do all these things just because they have the budget for it. We're suggesting they make the investments in the community so the community can sustain it, right? Community-based organizations can sustain these things. Help invest in that capacity for the community-based organizations to help sustain them. And stop being in competition. You know, you can come take pictures with the community at whatever, you know, projects and efforts that we are able to do together. It doesn't have to be in competition with. Government was never created to be able to do all of it. That's the whole point of nonprofit organizations, is to help support what government cannot do, right? Those social supports that government cannot do on their own.
Maria and Kristyn, I gotta jump in.
Sorry.
But what great and rich dialogue that is. And so, I mean, what I really want to lift up in terms of both of the last two panels is what the government, what these public institutions choose to prioritize. That's why this conversation is important. They could choose to prioritize the public health of working families and communities, but they don't. They could choose to prioritize the infrastructure and people and make those investments in terms of making sure that we have, and they love to use the word diverse, but they don't want to invest in diverse. And now we're getting ready to the other area that they won't invest in is workers. Now they need essential workers, all right? And they prove they need essential workers. But you know why they needed essential workers? So that they can make profit for these same corporations. They need, I mean, like, why did the school board, why do we have a governor fighting mask mandates, right? Because the people who work for the wealthy had to have a place to put their children. They could care less about whether you have choice. They just want to see the work happen. And so we want to go to our next phase where we're going to talk about workers. Don't y'all go anywhere. If you got to jump off, come back because we got some more work to do. All right. So we're going to take another